The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel of Mark. And the people were bringing children to Jesus that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he became indignant and said to them, "Let the children come to me. Do not prevent them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Amen, I say to you, whoever does not accept the kingdom of God like a child will not enter it." Then he embraced the children, blessed them, placing his hands upon them. The gospel inspired by God. The last mission I was in Kenya was a place called Kipsarman. Kipsarman literally means the place of the twins. And I was there from 1983 to 1986. And I inherited the mission from a guy called John Gary, who was the best missionary I've ever come across. And there was a mission on the compound, and there was a group of Irish sisters, medical missionaries of Mary, who did safari clinics. And I had 2.5 acres of coffee, which is how I supported the mission. And also there was a citrus fruit nursery that John had started in order to try to improve the local diet, different kinds of citrus fruit. So it was a fairly big compound. I remember at one stage, a woman wandered into the compound. She was big, very obese, very dirty, and very obviously psychotic. And she stayed around for 3 or 4 days. Nobody knew where she had come from, and she disappeared at the end of 4 days. So for 4 days, I was feeding her. But she had a little infant of about 7 months old. And I would watch her sometimes just breastfeeding this infant. And she would sit there absolutely filthy, totally psychotic, with the little baby, as little babies will do when they're breastfeeding. You know the way babies are touching the face of their mother, fingering the face and looking at the eyes and the nose and whatever. And this little child would look just fascinatedly at this who is his God. And I would look at them and just think, someday that little child is going to be told just how crazy his mother is. And then he'll begin to see her with different eyes. Instead of being a goddess figure for him, the source of all his nourishment, somebody who loved him unconditionally, and she did, he'll be told she's obese, she's crazy, and she's dirty. Hold that story for a moment. The second mission I was in Kenya, years before that, between 1973 and 1979, was a place called Kipchimchim, which means the place of the springs. There were water springs there. And I lived there for 7 years. And in this place, I had very different kinds of experiences. I lived among the Kipsigis. And for the Kipsigis men were totally forbidden to touch their own child. That was a mother's job. It was totally infra-dig for a male among the Kipsigis to hold his own baby. So the mother could hold the child, our younger siblings could hold the child, but a grown male, was not allowed to touch a child, even his own child. It was like totally infra-dig. Only women did that work, or little children did that work. So I remember one day being invited for a meal in a Kipsigis household, and we're sitting inside in the hut. And in a Kipsigis house, the fire is in the middle of the floor, right in the middle of the circle. There's a hole in the ground, and the fire is sitting inside in the hole, and then the pots are on top of it when they're cooking food. And for whatever reason, the mother is going out to make food for me. And for whatever reason, she leaves her little child, who's about 7 months old, on a cowskin on the ground over on one side of the hut. And the father and I are sitting across the fire from each other, and we're talking. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see the little infant roll off his back onto his belly, spot the fire, and start crawling across towards it. And the father spotted at the same moment as me. And he freaked out. He couldn't catch the child, because in front of another male, he would totally lose his dignity. So he's freaking out. His little baby is crawling towards the fire. And I can see these two emotions resting him. My God, I got to save my child. My God, I'm going to lose my dignity if I touch it. And so he starts screaming at the top of his voice, Jebiosani, Nyozo, Nyozo, Nyozo. Wife of mine, come in here and grab the child. So the child is getting closer and closer to the fire. And so finally I run and I grab the kid. I'm from a different tribe. We got different rules, so I wasn't losing my dignity. And I could see the relief on the father's face. I presume that if I weren't there, he'd have grabbed the child. But he couldn't grab the child in front of another male. It would be totally infra-dig. Now, in the gap between those two stories, in a sense, lies the journey of childhood and the journey of spirituality. A journey that goes all the ways from the godliness which kids come into our world filled with total unprejudiced love and acceptance and awe, and what culture does to them over the course of our education of them. And that's what I want to speak about today. I'm going to make 3 main points this morning. I want to talk about this journey from the innocence and the unconditional love and sense of awe with which we're born into what happens to us as we move through particular cultures and educational systems. So I'll make 3 points this morning. I'll talk firstly about the effects of language on this evolution. And then secondly, the effects of culture on this evolution. And then what happens when we recover awe? What happens to our spirituality? So firstly, the effects of language. I've said to you many times before that I'm convinced that language helps to create mindset, and mindset creates the cultural trance, and the cultural trance determines what reality is for any group of people. So language is a very, very important factor in this. I'll give you a few examples. There are some languages that force you to reveal information which you're not forced to reveal if you're using a different language. And I'll give you examples around gender and around time. So for instance, if you're reading a Swahili book, and you're reading a phrase, and the phrase says, nilienda nyumbani. Literally it means, I went home. If you're reading this phrase, I went home, you don't have to know whether the person who's saying that is male or female. You don't need that in order to read the word or translate it. If you read the phrase, ulienda nyumbani, you went home. You still don't have to know whether the speaker, the person who is being addressed, is male or female. So you can go through the 6 cases. You can say, alienda nyumbani, third person singular. Tulienda nyumbani, we went home. You still don't know whether we're male, female, or mixed. Mulienda nyumbani, a group of you went home, and we still don't have to reveal whether it's male, female, or mixed. And walienda nyumbani, they went home, and you still don't have to reveal whether they were male, female, or mixed. When you start translating to English, when you reach the third person singular, you're forced to reveal whether it's a male or a female. You can't get around it. You can say, I went home, you went home, we went home, you plural went home, they went home, without revealing the gender. But you can't do third person singular in English without revealing the gender. You're going to have to say either he went home or she went home. You don't have to do it in Swahili. Swahili is alienda. When you read alienda in Swahili, it could be male or female. You do not have to reveal it. But once you come into English, you have to reveal it. So languages sometimes force us to reveal information that other languages don't. If I want to say, where are you? In English, I can say, so I get a phone call from somebody looking for help, and I want to find out where they are. I say, where are you? And now, if I'm speaking in English, I don't have to reveal. It's unimportant whether the person I'm speaking to is male or female. I can just say, where are you? I can't do that in Hebrew. In order to ask, where are you in Hebrew, I have to know whether the other person is male or female. I'm going to say either, Efo ata, where are you if it's a male, or Efo at, where are you if it's a female. There's a different ending to the second person singular in Hebrew, indicating whether I'm addressing a female or a male. So Hebrew is going to force me in the second person to reveal whether or not I'm speaking to a man or a woman. And I can't speak to you if I don't know whom I'm addressing. If I don't know you're a male or female, I'm stuck in Hebrew. I can't ask you that question in Hebrew. So there's how language, just forces us into gender issues. Timing is another very interesting one here. If I say to you in English, he went home, I don't have to tell you when he went home. You just get the notion that it happened sometime in the past. It could have been 10 years ago, could have been a week ago, could have been a few minutes ago. If I say to you, he went home, I don't have to reveal to you when it was. If I speak to you in Kipsigese, I have to tell you immediately when he actually went home. Built into the verb itself. I'm not adding extra words. Built into the verb. If I say to you, kawaga, K-A-W-A, it means he went home sometime today. If I say to you, kawaga, it means he went home yesterday. If I say to you, kiwaga, it meant he went home sometime before yesterday. Could have been years ago or 3 weeks ago, but it wasn't yesterday and it wasn't today. And it's built into the verb itself. It's not that I'm adding extra words to indicate when it happened. The very verb itself is constricting me and forcing me to reveal when the past time was to which I'm alluding. So language puts kinds of straitjackets on the way in which we're able to articulate our truths. And that has an influence, obviously, in creating a trance. Now, every little baby born into a culture, between about the age of 3 months and 6 months, it will spontaneously begin to practice all known sounds in all known human languages. But after about 6 months, it'll focus on and begin only to repeat now the ones that are being fed back to it from its environment. So it becomes a very important period for learning, language learning for kids. Up to that stage, you can expose a child to 5 different languages. They can be as different as hung in South Africa with 47 different click sounds, and the child will pick them all up absolutely fluently if they're exposed to it at the proper period of time. After a while, they're not able to do it as well. So for the first 5 or 6 years, kids will just absorb languages. I remember one mission I was in Kenya was the 3rd mission I was in, a place called Eldama Ravine. And there was a big, big hospital there run by the Mercy Sisters from Cork. And there was an Italian doctor working there, and his wife was there, and he had a little girl who was about 5 years old when I knew them. And this little girl was fluent in Italian, because this is what she heard her parents speak. And she was fluent in English, because she spent a lot of time with the sisters, the Cork sisters, so she spoke English with a Cork accent. And then she was in school, and the medium of education in school was Swahili. So she learned Swahili, and her best friends were Kikuyu children, so she spoke Kikuyu. So this little 6 or 7-year-old kid speaking 4 languages totally fluently. So there's a period of time in which kids will just respond to any language they're hearing in the vicinity. After a while, they shut down, and it becomes very difficult for us as adults to pick up another language, increasingly difficult for us. So that's the effect that language has on mindset and culture and sense of reality. That's my first point. The second point then is that the cultural trance itself, what the effects of culture are on our mindset and our sense of reality. I've run by you a few times. There's a fallacy in philosophy called the myth of the given. And the myth of the given says that if there is an objective reality out there, we can say nothing about it. All we can report is what happens to that when we run it through our sensorium and our cognitive processes. We have no idea what's out there, absolutely zero. All we know is that given our range of senses and the number of senses we have, that's all it can report of itself to us, and our cognitive processes will make models and maps out of that. But we have no idea whether they actually correspond to what's out there. And so, for instance, if we had extra senses, how would reality look like? It would look very, very, very different. Or what if the range of our senses were extended a little bit? So, for instance, our vision operates between infrared and ultraviolet, about 400 nanometers to about 740 nanometers. Now, we can't see into the infrared or the ultraviolet, but there are life forms that do. So snakes, for instance, see into the infrared range. So we had a type of snake in Kenya called the spitting cobra. And the spitting cobra, it didn't bite, it spat its venom. And so when the spitting cobra looked at you, it saw your hot spots. Your eyes would glow, or if there were a wound in your body somewhere, that would glow in the infrared range, and they would spit their venom at that. And so the range is very determines what our reality looks like. Same with hearing. Humans can hear from about 20 to 20,000 hertz. If we could hear below 20, we'd hear our own muscles creak, literally. Bats can hear up to about 100,000 cycles per second. So a bat can have a perfect acoustical image of a rose. Now, we have no idea what an acoustical image of a rose would even be like. But a bat has an acoustical image of a rose. Now, you take your dog. I go out with my dog, Kayla, every day for several hours, and she's picking up all kinds of information from the smells on the ground. She's just downloading. This is her internet. She's downloading stuff at an extraordinary rate and getting information to which I do not have any access. So I wonder sometimes, what is her model of reality? It's a very different model from mine. You take, say, for instance, wine testers, professional wine testers. Basically, because I'm Irish, I have 4 tastes only: sweet and sour, salty and bitter. Anything after that is just totally wasted on me. Because when you live on a diet of meat and spuds, you don't need anything else. But if you wanted to be a wine tester, literally these guys they can fine-tune the differences, between thousands of wines. So how do you extend? What's their sense of reality like, as distinct from my meat and potato sense of reality? So very differently, our sensorium limits what our model of reality is. And typically, we start making our models of reality from just one particular state of consciousness. We think that the data that come to us from this alleged waking state of consciousness are the only data worth considering. Whereas we ignore totally all those data that come to us in our dreams, in hypnotic states, in mystical states, all those pieces of information, all those data, we totally ignore. So we live in a culture which is totally freezing and battening down what our sense of reality is. And then we force this on kids. We indulge them for the first few years when they report stuff. And we say, that's only your imagination. But what is imagination? We act in the adult world as if imagination is that faculty that allows us to make up stuff which isn't real. That is not imagination. Imagination is the ability that allows us to download from one dimension into this dimension. Now, the trick is to know which dimension you're in, because you can't act in the physical dimension on the basis of information coming from a different dimension and think it'll work. It's like trying to speak English in France or French in English. So the fact that we can go into these different dimensions and access all these states of consciousness, we need to know which state of consciousness we're operating in when we report our data. Otherwise, we're going to be laughed out of court. But all those realms exist, and kids have access to those until we shut them down. Which brings me to my third point. The effects of a sense of awe. One of the most misunderstood statements in all of the scriptures, in my opinion, is the statement we find in the Old Testament which says, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. I don't know of any other statement in all of Scripture that has been more misunderstood than this. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Because power structures have used this, particularly religions have used this, to create dogma and rules and hierarchies. The word in Hebrew that's translated as fear in English does not mean a kind of a craven cowardice in front of a distant demanding deity. It means to be filled with a sense of awe and curiosity and wonder. That's what it means. So the beginning of wisdom is not fear, cringing fear. It is a sense of absolute awe and curiosity and wonder faced with life. But we've used this phrase, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, in order to beat kids into submission and beat laity into submission and beat everybody except hierarchy into submission. That is not what it means. So we're constantly trying to close down kids' imaginations and tell them it's not real. Of course it's real. We just need to know at which order and which dimension of reality we're talking about so that we become multilingual instead of just monolingual. And then the work is begun by parents, unfortunately, where they initially indulge kids' imagination and then tell them it's only imagination. And then we bring them into the school system, and the school system shuts them down even further. And instead of imagination and wisdom, we fill them with factoids, which are mostly useless to them, except to pass examinations. Then the science picks up, in my opinion. A lot of science that is working at the behest of the military-industrial complex isn't operating out of a sense of wonder or a sense of awe at our world. It's just talking about the practical applications of technology. So the sense of wonder, which science should be helping us foment, it is not happening in the scientific community for the main part. And it certainly isn't happening in religion. Religion, which would be the adult mentors helping us to access all these wonderful states of consciousness so as to experience God, is giving us instead dry, dead, prepackaged dogma. And the media, who should be swapping and cross-fertilizing among cultures, instead of that, they're giving us a kind of a prepackaged, a pre-digested version of the agenda of the corporate royalty. And so kids, by the time they're 7 or 8 or 9, they're shut down spiritually. They're very lucky people if occasionally they come across an adult mystic who'll reopen up their sense of wonder. But for the main part, we're shut down. And so how do we go about redressing this situation? 2 ways, it seems to me, really work for us. The first one is to spend a lot of quality time in nature, watching the extraordinary profligacy of nature, the extraordinary creativity that it pours into its manifold manifestations. And the second way is to spend quality time with little children. Not just watching them, but participating in their play. And I don't mean just indulging their fantasies from an adult perspective. I mean going inside and seeing the world through their eyes, hearing it through their ears, touching it through their senses. And so I thought what I'd love to do before we baptize Gillian this morning, for about 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to invite us to go on a journey together. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a few moments. And I'm going to ask you to pick out a child. And it doesn't have to be a human child. It could be a little kitten, or it could be a puppy, or it could be a lamb. Some really young life form that you've encountered at some stage of your life. And I want you, for a few moments, just to watch that young creature and look at the élan vital, the sense of excitement and vitality with which it greets life. And then if you have the courage to it, I want you to become that little one. And I want you for a few moments to experience the world through the eyes of that lamb or that puppy or that kitty or that baby, and through the ears and through the tactile senses and the olfactory senses and the gustatory senses. Just for a few moments, 2 minutes of silence. Experience life in the spacesuit of a little one.